Hello everyone, and welcome to the very last video covering new material in World History 1. You guys have made it through an entire year, and whether you were in person or virtual, I just want to let you know that I'm proud of all of you and want to congratulate you on making it this far. Remember to keep getting your work turned in and finish strong, and I'm wishing you all the best of luck on your SOLs. Today, we're going to cover the Renaissance arts as our final topic. But before we get into that, I did want to show you guys that when you go to Google Classroom in classwork, you will find the Renaissance arts fill in the blank notes. Everything for this unit is due on the 14th, so make sure you're getting this turned in. You have a warm-up question that says, the Renaissance was a period of cultural change with the rise of famous artists and writers who we'll discuss today. What is your favorite piece of art? It can be a painting, a poem, or any piece of literature, or a song. And then explain why it is your favorite and what the piece is about. This can be anything. It does not have to be Renaissance era. It can just be whatever you're interested in. And then you'll also have an exit ticket, which is this Renaissance research sort of sheet. And you're just going to insert the name of your Renaissance contributor. You could even do Mona Lisa. We'll talk a little bit that Mona Lisa was a real person, even though she didn't have any major works or contributions. She's still an individual from the Renaissance. And we'll talk about how she had a notable family in Florence. So make sure that you are expanding your work. You don't have to stick to just the PowerPoint. You can look into it for your own interest as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Like we discussed in the first set of slides, new ideas were reflected in the arts, philosophy, and literature, remembering that we expanded our travel, thus expanding our minds and ideas of other people. Then we have these patrons, which is one of your vocabulary words, and they were wealthy from the trading business and sponsored works that glorified the city-states of northern Italy. So some such patrons we talked about in the last slides were the Medici family, who we'll talk about again today. And there they are. They owned banks. They initiated the building of the construction of buildings and bought lots of arts. They were known as godfathers of the Renaissance. They actually had 4 popes in their family and I want to say 2 queens. So they really had a long lineage from about the 1500s to the 1700s. So you can kind of see they give me, I don't know if this is completely on point, but they do give me very Godfather as far as like mobsters just being wealthy and powerful and having that influence over a city to where they dominated for 200 years. And then we see that education starts to move away from the church. So remembering we went through the Crusades, we start to get a little shaken up in our faith and ideas became more secular. So remembering that non-secular means having to do with religion, Christianity. Things like the Last Supper is more of a non-secular painting portraying Jesus and religion, whereas the Statue of David is a secular piece of work. So not having to do with religion. It's can be confusing with that but just because it has the non-secular, remember that it has to do with religion when it's non-secular. Secularized means human, more worldly. So let's talk about the difference between the medieval versus Renaissance eras. So art and literature during the Middle Ages were focused on the church and salvation. As you can see here on the left, we see someone getting what looks like baptized or, a ceremony with priest. And here we see the what is on the top of the Sistine Chapel by Michelangelo. And we're seeing more humans, not the gods, more than Jesus or, one figment from one religion, a monotheistic kind of view, remembering that monotheism is one God. And then art and literature of the Renaissance focused on the individuals, worldly matters, and Christianity. So while it still had some play with Christianity, it was not as large of a focus. Whereas in the Middle Ages, remember we called the early Middle Ages the Dark Ages, because we were really looking for that faith to pull us through. And now we're seeing the rise of prosperity, the rise of wealth, the rise of trade, travel. And so people's priorities start to shift. So Mr. Leonardo da Vinci, who, if you take art, I am sure you have heard about him a bit this year, or even if you don't take art, you might know who this is. So he was a painter, scientist, and inventor, not just a painter. He created the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. The Last Supper being important because in that picture we'll look at in a couple slides, you see some Roman type architecture surrounding Jesus and the apostles. And then in the Mona Lisa, like I said, the Mona Lisa is actually based off of a real woman. It was said to have been commissioned for her family. I believe her last name starts with a G, and I don't even want to try and disrespect good old Mona Lisa. But knowing her family was a notable name in Florence, they were wealthy silk merchants. So they still had, remembering that our city states were kind of controlled by wealthy merchants and patrons. And then we have Michelangelo, who was a painter and a sculptor. We know him for the statue of David and the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which we looked at a close-up of in that first picture, in one of those first pictures. And then Petrarch, he's a poet. He wrote sonnets in humanist scholarship. He really focused on the humanism. He is known sort of as the father of humanism. And this is more just focusing on the body, focusing on the mind, and less focused on the spirit, focusing on human behavior and reasoning behind behavior rather than signs from God, I guess you can say. Here's Mona Lisa, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, and then the Last Supper. And like I was mentioning, at the top of the picture, you can kind of see some Roman style architecture there in the detailing. And then they are all around Jesus here. And then the Sistine Chapel, there's obviously a lot going on here. But knowing that this is on the ceiling is kind of insane. I remember my favorite thing to learn about this was that Michelangelo actually laid on his back on a platform. He would have this tall tower he would climb, and he would get on the top of it, lay on his back, and he actually, I want to say, started to go blind from paint dripping from the ceiling. Because imagine if you're laying on your back and trying to paint something. I just did it, like laid my head back and looked at the ceiling and tried. And not only I guess he prevented his neck from hurting, but I can only imagine how paint dripping in your eyes would feel. Then we have the statue of David, which is really a secular piece of work because it focuses intently on the body, and it focuses on more human shapes. Like you see, he's kind of built with the hair being defined, the muscles being defined. This is not a statue of, say, Mary or David or of Jesus it is, and it's not so much focusing on that salvation of it, it's more just portraying the human form. And they did this a lot through spiritual manner, like we see in the Last Supper, kind of bringing our ideas of Christianity into more classical Greek and Roman ideas. So, like I was just mentioning, humanism and the focus on the human body, humanity, behaviors, things like that, celebrated the individual, and again stimulated the study of classic Greek and Roman literature and culture, which Petrarch, who we just talked about doing the sonnets and everything, he was very much responsible for getting a lot of works translated into Latin for people to be able to better read and judge for themselves. And this study and the revival of literature and culture was supported by wealthy patrons. So thinking back to our Medici family, our silk merchants, things like that, fur traders maybe. And then we see that the Renaissance moves north. So they pack up their bags and the ideas spread. And so, with the rise of trade, travel, and literacy, it was not only the Italian Renaissance, but it also moved on into Europe. So, England, northern France, and Germany. And then growing wealth in northern Europe supports the Renaissance ideas. So again, it's the foundations of just strong economies, which is why we kind of talked about the economics and politics first, and why we're now talking about the arts and the things that were supported by this prosperity. And then Northern Renaissance thinkers merged humanist ideas with Christianity. And before we get into that, we kind of see that we were able to bring cohesion between humanism and religion, thinking, if you do believe in God, then obviously God put you here and God put thoughts into your head. So if you're having these humanist thoughts, then obviously there's a reason through God that we're going through this period in time. And then the creation of the movable type printing press was huge on spreading Renaissance ideas north. The production, specifically in the sale of books, helped spread the ideas. So remembering, we're getting a lot of works translated. We're getting a lot of works able to read. We're educating more of our citizens. Works are easier to read. Manuscripts are being discovered in old monasteries. And then the Gutenberg Bible. So the printing of the Bible. And this means that you didn't have to listen to just the Pope to understand the Bible, because you could interpret it for yourself. And so here we see how the ideas moved north from Italy. And finally, our last slide, Erasmus, the praise of folly. He criticized the clergy and pointed out the mistakes. So he was kind of criticizing this government. That's why I had you guys think about how you guys would create a government, or just what you guys think of if there was ever an opportunity to create a new political system, what yours would be. Because whether there's criticisms or not, it gets you thinking about these things or the actual system you live in. Then Sir Thomas More, he states that if we got rid of greed, war, and crime, the world would be a perfect utopia. Poor More, hey, that kind of goes well together. Poor More got beheaded by Henry VIII, who you'll learn more about in world history too. But he criticized the marriage of Henry VIII. And so the king, said, I don't want you around if you're going to criticize me. I don't want you around if you don't agree with me. And as you'll find, Henry VIII got very comfortable with executions in guillotine style. So The Northern Renaissance artists, especially these guys, portrayed more religious and secular subjects, including politics, including the um, humanist ideas, including more banking instead of churches. Think about that. When the buildings were rising while churches were being built, there was also this idea of banks being built. So it's a new change, a new role that society is forming. And it's really interesting to see how the late Middle Ages forward really launches us into a progression into what we know as society today. And you'll learn more about that through World 2. And then you'll even learn about how all of this brought to the coming of not only America, but, 2020, 2021. So I hope you all found something throughout this course that you can take with you, whether it was a skill such as analyzation or content knowledge, such as the Spartans and the Peloponnesian Wars or the Crusades. I hope that you found something that made this of value to you. And I hope you remember before the SOLs that we are always here to help, Mr. Bowman and myself also. Although I will not be with you until the end of the year, the very, very last day, I am always here to help as long as I have my school email. So please reach out to me if you ever need anything as far as school, or if you guys are on a college career path and would like some tips or just have questions. I want to be a support system for you guys. So make sure that you are getting in all of your work. Just keeping up with it a little bit each night will go a long way. Study for that. And, doing your work also kind of helps you study for the SOL. Get a good night's sleep and eat some breakfast before your tests. I'm wishing you all the best, and I'll miss you all. Thank you so much for such a great student teaching experience. You guys, the people definitely make the place, and that's what you all did. So until next time, farewell.